So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Sahir Anand. Now, Sahir Anand is the Research Director for the Retail, Hospitality, and CPG practice at the Aberdeen Group. He focuses on technology and process management practices in retail and the interplay between retail and consumer goods. He's the former general manager with Staples, where he was involved in store and field management operations, and most recently, he authored the 21st Century Retail Supply Chain Report for the Aberdeen Group. Sahir?
Thank you, Chris. Again, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, depending on where you're based. Thank you for joining the webinar. I'm sure that there are numerous folks who want to be able to ask us some questions at the end, and we would welcome those questions. Like Chris said, my name is Sahir Anand. I'm the Research Director for the Retail Practice, and I'm going to walk you through a few critical areas of success when it comes to the issue of a private label strategy, but not so much just private label. When you think about the overall impact on merchandising, supply chain, and the optimization of your direct import or indirect import strategies, you obviously, any retailer out there, whether it's a large retailer or a mid-size retailer, or for that matter, even an SMB retailer, it becomes extremely important to think about the cost-based scenarios as well as all other factors that impact sourcing and your overall merchandising strategy from an optimization standpoint. Where are you buying from? Who are you buying from? How is that what you bought is really flowing through your supply chain? And how is that supply chain reactive and proactively addressing the customer need at the retail storefront or in a channel? And obviously, as the product travels from the source to the brokers or agents and then into the manufacturers, from the manufacturer's DC to the retailer's DC through a third-party logistics provider or your own owned logistics provider, and finally from the retailer's DC to the retail store. It's a whole cycle. It's a life cycle in a product's time frame, and it is a life cycle in terms of how a product is really developed, and then right from concept to delivery, how it flows into that life cycle. So as we know about all these issues, Chris mentioned that cost is really overbearing right now, and just to share some data with you, we did a survey recently, and we interviewed some VP of merchandising, VP of supply chain, and VP of procurement kind of job roles. And we found out that definitely cost is one of the areas, but then we also looked at the comparison, as you can see on your screen, when it comes to a private label strategy versus a hybrid strategy, which is a combination of private label goods as well as branded goods. And then when we compare that with just a branded strategy, we look at the spectrum of what's available in the retail industry, and we find several differences in terms of the overall merchandising landscape. First and foremost, when you think about retailers, both mid-size and large retailers, we find that in terms of the audience that we interviewed for those that use a private label merchandise strategy in retail today, the overbearing issue around strategy and the key strategy area is definitely reduction in costs. Now, this cost scenario is obviously important across the life cycle of the product. And certainly, procurement strategies are very important when it comes to the linkage between costs and the effectiveness of your procurement. The second aspect where we see that there is a difference between those companies that are using a private label merchandise strategy versus a branded retailer and a hybrid retailer, we find that sourcing operations are extremely important for those that have both private label items that they sell at the shelf level and those that sell a combination of branded and private label merchandise. So obviously the sourcing operations become extremely important, and the reason they become extremely important in this present economy and the recessionary times where retailers are impacted by a high cost of goods sold scenario, they are looking to obviously reduce costs where possible, and best-in-class retailers are extremely focused on improving sourcing operations from an end-to-end perspective, from design to delivery, and that's definitely reflective of what our data is showing. The third factor, as you can see on your screen, from left to right, the improvement in product development programs and all the product development related issues, including how a product is sourced, where a concept is identified, the design phase comes into play, the quality control phase comes into play, and then all the way from quality control, that product travels to the retail shelf. Obviously, that's another key strategy area for retailers, and what we are seeing is that on the whole, approximately a third or less than a third of retailers are focused on product development programs, and that really is the left side of the overall product life cycle, where it really is relative to before the purchase order is issued. So this strategy is really where retailers are focused on before the purchase order has been issued. And then you see the last strategic area where private label retailers are sort of ahead of the branded retailers as well as the hybrid retailers. We find that 38% of companies are very well focused on improving vendor collaboration. And this collaborative element is not only a supply chain element, it really is very well honed into the e-procurement side of things, and it really talks about not only the data collaboration aspect, which has been spoken about in the industry, but goes a little bit beyond. According to our data, it's about the procurement life cycle, it's about how POs are being issued, how POs are being consolidated, how POs are being settled between retailers and their suppliers, how real-time is the information for the supplier community once the PO has been issued, and that PO goes into process in terms of really informing their own supply chain in terms of how they're going to react to that demand from the retailer. So as you can see from this slide, there is a good differentiation in terms of the strategies according to the type of merchandise that you're carrying as a retailer. And what we are also seeing that on an average, both mid-size and large retailers are equally as focused on reduction in costs, so the overall reduction in the cost of goods sold, as well as the improvement in sourcing operations. Now, what we've also found, according to our data, that 77% of retailers, according to Aberdeen data, have a global or hybrid sourcing need. So a hybrid sourcing need really means that they source their products from a combination of global and domestic suppliers. So as you can see, this differentiation between how complex your overall procurement strategy and your retail supply chain strategy does hinge on where you're sourcing from, and an exceeding amount of retailers have looked outwards, obviously because of a cost saving, when it comes to having a sourcing strategy which looks beyond domestic frontiers into international boundaries. So that's not something which is entirely reflective of some of the other segments that we've surveyed. The next slide presents a scenario where we've compared the pain points, rather the strategic areas of difference between mid-market and enterprise-level companies. And what we found is that the mid-market companies are almost at parity with the larger retail companies. And just to define large retail and mid-market retail according to Aberdeen methodology, large retailers do more than $1 billion in revenue on an annual basis, and mid-market retailers do between $50 million to $1 billion. And while there is parity between large retailers and mid-market retailers on the cost reduction strategy and the improvement in sourcing operations overall. There is some difference on two other aspects. One is the vendor collaboration aspect, where we feel that more mid-market companies, according to our survey results, are focused on vendor collaboration-related issues versus large retailers currently. What we've also found is that more mid-market retailers are interested in improving the pre-PO process, the product development phase in the overall sourcing operations. And that's key, because here we have a combination of companies that look at both post-PO as well as pre-PO processes, and we feel that mid-market companies are doing a far better job right now in order to focus on these two key strategies, which can optimize their supply chain and merchandising strategy as a whole. So it's not that retailers in the larger segments are behind, it's just that it's not a current focus for them. So having said that, what I would like to just share with you real quick is an example of a couple of retailers, but more importantly, I would like to share an example of a company by the name Cost Plus. We spoke to this company, Cost Plus, and we found that almost 80% of their merchandise is actually private label. And the reason I bring it up right now is not only are these private label items being sourced through several thousand vendors, but the pain point that this company is facing right now is the overall fulfillment of the cost factor that they want to be able to reduce year over year when it comes to their sourcing operations. They also want to improve their overall importer security filing because they have a direct import strategy. And they've identified these vendors in different parts of Asia as their primary vendors, and they deal with them on a direct basis. And they sell branded products, they sell primary rugs, they sell bath products, ceramics, and furniture. And if you think about their strategy, what they're focusing on right now is, in order to reduce costs, what they've really done is they've streamlined their entire vendor relationship program. They've not only provided their vendors visibility in the post-PO and the pre-PO process, but also they've completely stopped faxing POs. They've completely stopped the manual processes of settlement of POs. They are helping their suppliers in terms of the 10+2 filing programs. They're also helping their vendors fill out information in real time. And they're also helping their suppliers in terms of other documentation related to the importer security filing. So that's just one example of how companies are making it work right now in order to reduce costs. Now, according to this retailer, the result from all the activities that they've undertaken in terms of automation of vendor relations, ease of reviewing purchase orders, their focus on logistics, and their EDI strategy, and really streamlining their EDI strategy for seamless purchase order tracking, purchase order delivery. What this company has found is that their year-over-year cost has reduced by 20 to 25% overall. So obviously, the cost of delivery is well in control, and moreover, their vendors are happy, and it's a very good situation for any company to be in. Now, having given you this example, what I would like to state on this slide is how are companies really correlating the cost reduction areas, which is a key strategy right now, and the sourcing operations capabilities, which is another key strategy for both mid-market and large retailers, and also those that have private label, branded, or hybrid strategies. And as you can see on your screen, what we found is that the top 4 factors on cost reduction include the reduction in lead times for delivery. We also see that the low inventory turns year over year is a big factor as far as the cost reduction element. So inventory turns and the improvement of inventory turns is definitely a focus. What we are also finding that the overall cost of goods sold situation has hampered at least a fourth of retailers, and they certainly feel that they're focused in terms of cost reduction on reducing the overall cost of goods sold as an enterprise. And then lastly, what's always been a pain point for retailers, which is the high transportation and distribution costs, and that's certainly a focus for a fourth of retailers. So these are the four components of what retailers are planning to do within the next 12 to 18 months as far as cost reduction is concerned. Now, on the corresponding side, if you look at the right side, where we have the sources, the sourcing operational capabilities. And when we look at that, we obviously see a combination of improving your network optimization, the integration of visibility with processing of your trading partner operations. So obviously the focus on data integration, process integration, and visibility creation with your trading partners, and that's a preference for almost half the companies that we have surveyed. Secondly, what we found is that the real-time nature of sales data visibility and the point-of-sale data visibility between retailers and their trading partners is important for, again, 48% of retailers surveyed. Again, another critical element from a sourcing operations standpoint is the ability to really loop the overall process for not only item listing and item sourcing, but also the setup processes when it comes with the trading partners and their whole interaction with end-to-end sourcing. Lastly is the settlement process, which rates high amongst retailers right now in terms of improvement in sourcing operations. And what we found is that 42% of companies indicate that they want to, in terms of the network integration and data integration strategy, they certainly want to improve order status visibility, order settlements, payments, so that suppliers are happy and you have a unique relationship, an intimate relationship with your suppliers where they're responsive and you are equally responsive as a retailer to their needs, and that overall covers the sourcing operational capabilities. And while the next slide loads up, and there you go, we have the next slide, and this really tells the performance right now when it comes to how private label strategies score over branded goods. We wanted to do a comparison on retailers that are using private label merchandise versus those that are using branded goods, and we found a big difference in terms of performance. If you can see on the screen, this is the year-over-year improvement in the gross margin return on inventory. Now, gross margin return on inventory is an extremely important metric, and to tell you honestly, right now, the best-in-class retail strategy is to take gross margin return on inventory as a metric down to the quarter-by-quarter views, or down to the month-to-month views, and even in the cases of some best-in-class retailers, week-to-week views in terms of how categories are performing, in terms of the investment that is made into the inventory and the product of that which is impacting inventory turn rates. So if you were to think about the definition of GMROI, it's nothing but a product of the gross margin rates across categories and out of the inventory investment, and then the inventory turn rate that the company or the retailer has attained. And what we found is that private label retailers are by far ahead of branded good retailers when it comes to year-over-year improvement in GMROI, 12.4% compared to 10.8%, and that's a difference of almost more than a few hundred basis points. So that's pretty good when you consider that millions are invested in inventory every week for a large retailer anyways. So if you look at the next slide, this is why companies are performing better when it comes to a private label retailer versus branded retailer. So think of the last slide, why companies are performing better on GMROI, especially in those that are using a private label strategy versus a branded strategy, and the reasons are somewhat related to this slide. What we find is that regulatory compliance, auditing, and supplier risk management are by far the top enablers where private label retailers are differentiating themselves versus those that are using or selling branded goods. Now, what we found, the reason why we were able to determine that is when we compared the performance of private label retailers using compliance or auditing capabilities as enablers or technology use, we found that they have reported a 9% year-over-year increase in GMROI versus only about 5% for those retailers that are non-users of compliance and auditing capabilities, and those are typically in terms of our data, the branded retailers. So we find that private label retailers are more focused on the issues of QA, QC. They're more focused on compliance related to direct import models. They're more focused on the quality of the product. They find less recalls in terms of their products. And over time, the quality of private label goods has improved quite a bit when you compare it with what was happening about 10 years ago. Now we find companies like Staples who've got in a real innovative strategy as far as their private label brands, whether that's for binders or their own paper, or for that matter, even USB cables or other branded goods like other private label goods like ink cartridges. So that quality issue has been addressed by retailers, and that has in fact helped them reduce their returns at the point of service. It's helped them reduce the negative customer branding issues. It has helped them improve the penetration of private label versus branded goods, and that obviously has impacted GMROI. So that's the explanation of why things have happened the way they've happened. Now, if you look at the next slide, these are the components of every key enabler that we listed on the previous slide. When you look at regulatory compliance, we have shipping regulations. These are all best-in-class processes that companies can follow and learn from. 10+2, importer security filings, or ISF. Also, companies need to be aware of the embargo laws and the custom laws. So important, because when I spoke to Argos recently, and I spoke to one of their heads of supply chain and their private label strategy, they told me that Argos in the last 1 year has only focused on their direct import model and has looked at these regulatory compliance issues as a key determinant of cost reduction in terms of their direct import model. And that's actually helped them improve their margin and their bottom line as well. If you look at the second point, which is auditing, it's not only about approval lists, but also about credit notes that have been issued on rejected items. And then retailers are comparing in terms of auditing their suppliers, they're not only comparing these credit notes that have been issued, but also rating them on clear lines of communication, real-time communication, informing the retailer in advance of any issues in terms of product delivery. Also, compliance in terms of product specifications, so there are no recall issues or no other issues as far as putting good product on the shelf, and also on-time delivery or perfect delivery. Lastly, if you look at supplier risk management, this space is really coming up amongst best-in-class companies. We're finding that the influence over supply chain trading partners, the extent of supply chain network and process integration, as well as supply chain finance issues, are extremely important as far as an effective supply chain or a supplier risk management strategies that retailers, and especially private label retailers, are putting into place. Moving on quickly to the next slide is the trade-offs. And this is an important slide because this looks at those companies that are making short-term trade-offs in order to make short-term gains. So basically, they are compromising on quality and compliance issues in order to make financial gains and be answerable to the needs of Wall Street. And if you look at it, it's the branded retail and the hybrid, those companies that carry hybrid, both branded as well as private label goods that make the most compromises or the maximum amount of trade-offs. And what it leads to is this. When you look at those companies that are making trade-offs and versus those that are not, we see that the companies that are not making a trade-off over time make a better net profit, 3 times as better. And those companies that are making trade-offs are in fact finding that they've exceeded their costs by 4 times when it compares to companies that have not made any trade-offs over time. So net-net, the message is do not make trade-offs, short-term or long-term, when it comes to your sourcing operations, because you're not going to find the results. It will catch up with you. The next slide presents some key best-in-class insights, and this is our best-in-class data, which is collected through our weighted means, and we considered 3 key performance indicators in order to determine who is best-in-class as far as sourcing operations and as far as their overall merchandising strategy, who's average and who's laggard. And typically, the top 20% who outperform the rest of the industry in terms of net profit, GMROI, and product procurement costs year over year are the best-in-class companies. And what we found is that, as you can see, the 3 bullets right at the bottom, best-in-class companies by far are at least 1.5 to 2 times more likely than all other retailers to outperform on net profit, GMROI, and product procurement costs. Now, coming to the last few slides before I hand it over to Tony Eskin, who's the CEO at Arrigo, I would say that unequivocally that best-in-class companies are very, very focused on cost reduction, as much as what our data shows is all others. But one thing I would say that when it comes to sourcing and vendor collaboration, it seems as though that best-in-class companies are doing a much better job in terms of their key strategic areas, whereas it is the average and the laggard companies that need to do a much better job. So obviously, as you can see, it's cost reduction that is the focus for best-in-class companies, but not sourcing and collaboration, because best-in-class is obviously doing a very good job at sourcing operations and collaboration, and this is the reason why. If you look at the next slide, best-in-class companies by far outperform average and laggard companies, not only in terms of their multi-enterprise business networks, but setting up an integrated trading partner data strategy and connecting the trading partner data with their internal processes, whether it's merchandising related, whether it's buying related, whether it's procurement related decisions. They connect the data with their internal processes, the trading partner data. What best-in-class companies do far more effectively also is that they do a much better job in terms of onboarding trading partners in terms of process collaboration, sometimes months and sometimes weeks in advance compared to average and laggard retailers. Therefore, they are more agile, and therefore they're able to control the risks in their supply chain and their merchandising strategies. And then we have a quote, which you can read on the right-hand side from Paul Kimsey, who's the Director of Information Systems at Argos, and he details what they're doing more effectively right now in terms of best-in-class connectivity and integration. And while the last slide comes up, these are the 5 critical best-in-class success factors. First and foremost is cost reduction and sourcing operations. Obviously, those are the pillars of a consistent multi-tier, multi-enterprise supply chain strategy, which involves optimization as far as inventory, merchandising, and supply chain. And that leads into why that's possible is because best-in-class companies today are integrating and setting up e-procurement and vendor portal strategies of really connecting trading partner data with their supply chain processes, with their procurement processes, and their merchandising processes. The last 3, which is a critical sort of set of success factors, is, as I said, compliance, auditing, risk management. Those 3 pillars, extremely important. Do not make trade-offs as a retailer in those areas, because you'll see short-term gains maybe, but in the long term, you're not going to be successful either in terms of GM ROI or net profitability. Then we come towards real-time use of data when it comes to private label process visibility and communication. Private label companies do a far better job when it comes to the visibility and communication with their buyers and really connecting their buyers, merchandisers, procurement staff, because at the end of the day, it's a direct import model and they want to maximize margin. The same strategies need to be applied on the branded side. And finally, in terms of those technology areas that are best in class, the 3 bullet points there cover it pretty effectively. 100% of best in class companies are optimizing their pre-PO and post-PO process by focusing on cost forecasting, accruals, and benefits. 83% of best in class companies are focusing on tracking and network intelligence through collaboration, through process integration. So tracking is an end-to-end cycle of really understanding where the product flow is, where the optimum inventory flow is, and it should be visible to your internal stakeholders in the retail chain as well as your external stakeholders who are your trading partners. And finally, the point around compliance, auditing, and quality control, which ensures effective margin and less recalls, and that is a strategy being followed by 75% of best-in-class companies. So, folks, these are the 5 critical success factors. I'm sorry I exceeded my time. I'm now going to hand it back over to Chris.